Today's story is a rather special one. It wasn't sent in by anyone. Instead, Uncle Three collected it himself. This tale takes place in Laos, in a region crisscrossed by dense river systems. The main character, Somsak, lives in this area, and the ghost story unfolds right around his home tonight. Somsak's family had always been farmers, tending to rice paddies and fruit trees. When Somsak grew up, he went to study in the big city, which was quite a distance from his home. Because of the distance, he only returned home once a week. On one particular visit, a relative of Somsak's came over. This uncle was his grandfather's younger brother. Somsak's grandfather and his great-uncle often stayed up all night, chatting. That evening was no different. The two older men sat around recounting old stories, the simple pleasure of old age. Somsak was seated nearby, helping his mother pluck vegetables, when the two elders noticed him yawning and looking bored. "Do you want to hear a ghost story?" his grandfather asked, hoping to keep him awake. Of course, a young man like Somsak would never turn down an offer like that. So Somsak's grandfather began to tell his tale. He said that at the time of the story, he, Chandra, was 12 years old. His younger brother, Kamshe, was 10. Every evening, the two boys would go set hooks for snakehead fish out in the rice fields. They'd check their lines closer to dawn. Sometimes, they'd switch to setting traps for paddy crabs and fish. Life went on, steady and regular. As kids, they didn't really think about ghosts. They'd heard many stories and knew ghosts existed, but they couldn't honestly imagine how scary they were or how to guard against them. One day, the two brothers went to check their lines around 3 a.m. You had to set the lines and then stay up to watch them, or go to sleep and wake up super early to check. As soon as they reached the edge of the field, they heard the fish splashing wildly. It sounded like a big, strong fish, a large snakehead, big enough to sell, maybe even too big to eat all at once. The brothers were thrilled, giggling with excitement, and quickly grabbed their torches to pull up the lines. But when Grandfather Chandra pulled up the first fishing rod, his face fell. There was no fish, yet he'd clearly heard the rod tugging hard, as if a giant fish had taken the bait. But when he pulled it up, there was nothing. They walked all around the field's edge, checking all 30 fishing rods. Not a single fish as they'd hoped. What was worse, out of 30 rods, 10 had their lines snapped and hooks broken. Kamsai then suggested to Chandra, "Someone probably came by earlier and just cut the lines to get the fish faster. What can we do?" Defeated, the two brothers trudged back home. Grandfather Chandra's garden back then was full of fruit trees of all kinds. Laos is known for its gardens, and most homes have one. It's not a sign of wealth. They were halfway to the lychee tree when they heard something, a crunching, slurping sound like someone chewing. Grandfather Chandra looked around but saw nothing. They kept walking, and the sound continued. It was late, and the air was cold and damp. Chandra was already carrying a bundle of empty fishing rods, and this new sound made him a bit nervous. Kamsai, holding the torch, shone it up into the apple tree. And dear heavens, what they saw made their blood run cold. There, perched in the tree, was an older man with white hair and a sickly, pale face. In his hands, he held a bundle of fish. Uncle Three said it was almost 10 fish, like a bundle of corn cobs to help you visualize it. The fish weren't struggling at all. The older man lifted one fish to his mouth and took a bite. A clean, swift chomp. His teeth must have been incredibly sharp. The two brothers were so scared they nearly wet their pants. They couldn't run. They just stood there, shining the torch up at the older man. His mouth was covered in fish scales and blood was dripping from his lips. It was absolutely disgusting. He then held out the fish, missing its head towards them. "Want some? I'll give you some," he asked, then cackled. His laughter wasn't regular for an older man. It echoed, high-pitched and distorted, like a messed-up radio signal. Luckily, Kamshay's torch had been burning for a while and was starting to singe his hand. The sudden burn startled him. He yelped, dropped the torch, grabbed Chandra's hand, and they bolted all the way back to the house. That's how they escaped the older man's ghost. Once inside, they finally dared to cry. They cried so hard their mother couldn't calm them down. Chandra's father asked what was wrong, and the boys, still sobbing, told him everything. Their father was a courageous man. Instead of being scared, he got angry. He grabbed an axe and stormed out towards the lychee tree. Their mother, afraid he'd get into trouble alone, quickly grabbed a lamp and a scrubbing broom and ran after him. Uncle Three noted that the scrubbing broom has a fascinating history in Asian folklore, often used to fight ghosts, but only by the bravest people. When they got there, Chandra's father was already chopping down the lychee tree, cursing loudly. Their mother clearly saw several snakehead fish with their heads bitten off at the base of the tree. This proved that Chandra and Kamshay hadn't been lying. The next morning, both brothers woke up with high fevers. It took several days for the fever to break before they could go back to foraging. Uncle Three explained that in Asia, it's believed that prolonged contact with ghosts or negative energies weakens the body, causing fever for several days. The stronger and scarier the ghost, the longer the fever lasts. Despite their fear, life had to go on. They had to work to eat. Grandfather Somsak is 80 years old now, so this story happened at least 70 years ago. Laos was a difficult place to make a living back then, and ever since Chandra's father chopped down that lychee tree, the older man's ghost from that tree harbored a grudge against their house. From that day on, every night they'd hear dishes clanking inside the house. If they cooked just enough rice for everyone, it was fine. But if they had any leftovers, it would spoil into a slimy mess. Chandra's younger siblings would often be teased by the ghost at night, crying uncontrollably. Chandra's father was furious. He cut down mulberry branches and thorny cacti and hung them all around the house. And it worked. The spirit seemed afraid of them and stopped coming inside to bother them. It only lingered around the trees in the backyard and behind the house. Initially, their father wanted to chop down those trees too, but their mother reasoned, if it stays in one tree, we chop it, then it just moves to another. Are we going to chop down the whole garden? So they decided to leave it be, as long as it didn't come into the house. During that time, a snake catcher lived in their village. He'd catch snakes to sell, and at night, he'd often catch frogs to use as bait. One day, he asked Chandra's father if he could go into their garden to see some frogs. In the countryside, these things weren't complicated. People didn't usually ask permission for something so simple. But he did. Their father happily agreed. The snake catcher went into the garden, and after about an hour, the whole family heard loud thudding footsteps running frantically towards the house. Everyone was confused at first, thinking he was being chased by a snake. He rushed into the house, jumped onto the father's bed, and huddled there, his skin covered in goosebumps. When they finally asked him what happened, he recounted his terrifying experience. He said he'd been making his way through the bushes, looking for frogs, trying to find a quiet spot to set his line. While he was busy, he heard a rustling sound behind him. He turned around, but saw no one. He figured it was just an animal and went back to his work. But then, he suddenly felt a bone-chilling cold on his back. It wasn't just cold. It felt like someone's icy cold hand was stroking his spine. It was incredibly strange. He quickly spun around and came face to face with an extremely older man with a ghastly pale face. The older man sniffed the air, then extended his hand as if asking for something. The snake catcher had just met him and had no idea what he wanted. He was utterly bewildered. The older man lunged, grabbing the basket hanging from the snake catcher's hip. He was swift, acting in a split second before the man could react. He plunged his hand in, pulled out a frog, and then shoved it whole into his mouth, chewing it ravenously. The frog was still croaking and squirming inside his mouth as he chewed. The snake catcher knew immediately what he was dealing with. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted all the way back to the house. As he ran, he could hear the thudding footsteps chasing him right behind. He was breathless when he made it inside, but relieved to be among people. From that day on, the snake catcher never dared to set foot in Chandra's father's garden again. Then, one rainy day, everyone was stuck indoors, afraid to go out into the fields because of the heavy rain and rumbling thunder. Chandra was lying inside when he heard a tremendous crack. His ears rang because the lightning strike was so close. A soursop tree behind the house, heavy with fruit, had been split in two. After the rain stopped, their father went to check but saw nothing unusual, just the dead tree. But their elders always said, if lightning strikes a ghost and misses, the ghost becomes even more powerful, turning into a demon. And it was true. It couldn't have been more accurate. From that day on, it became a nightmare, not just for Chandra's father's family, but for the entire village. Along the riverbank near their house, their father had planted a line of trees to prevent erosion. During that time, people passing by those trees at night often saw a hairy, white-haired man. When he saw people approaching, he would launch himself from the treetop into the river with a splash, then vanish. But then, if you looked again, he'd be back in the treetop, ready to leap again. He would do this, cackling wildly. Faint-hearted people would never dare to cross that path at night again. Some even claimed he had long fangs that reached down to his chin. At dawn, people would still see him swinging back and forth in the trees. One morning, a woman was rowing her boat to the market early. As she passed the riverbank trees, she saw a man waving for a ride. The rumors in the village about the Riverbank Demon were well known. She knew it was the demon, so she ignored him and rowed harder, desperately trying to get away. The older man saw she wouldn't stop. A little while later, after she'd gone some distance, he lunged into the river with a whoosh and vanished. The woman was rowing frantically, but then suddenly, her boat stopped dead. She pulled with all her might, but it wouldn't budge. She suspected something was wrong and felt a cold chill down her spine. She looked back, and there he was, the same disheveled, white-haired man clinging to the side of a boat. It was still dark, and all she could see was his white hair and his exposed fangs. She screamed bloody murder, loud enough to wake the village. She couldn't row anymore, practically crawling on her boat. The demon seemed delighted by her terror, cackling menacingly before diving back into the water. She sat on her ship, shaking, chanting Buddhist prayers until dawn. When the sun fully rose, she just rowed straight home, forgetting all about the market. Chandra's father knew all these stories, but he didn't know how to drive the demon away. He and his wife were terrified it would come into the house to bother them. So they continued to cut fresh mulberry branches and cacti, hanging them all around the house, replacing them as they withered. At night, they also forbade Chandra and Kamse from going fishing or crabbing. Then, one day, the whole village was in an uproar. A 5-year-old child was missing. The child had been playing in the yard with his siblings. By dusk, he hadn't come inside. Apparently, he'd been playing too wildly, shouting and screaming, and his mother had scolded him. He hadn't listened and eventually got a spanking. In a fit of anger, he stubbornly stayed out in the yard, refusing to come in. His mother had warned him that if he stayed outside, the demon from the riverbank trees would come looking for him. But he wasn't scared and just kept sitting there. His mother went back inside to light a lamp, and when she came back out, her child was gone. After waiting and searching frantically around the house, she couldn't find him. Panicked, she screamed for help, and the neighbors joined the search. They looked in the bushes and even in the river, but found nothing. They searched all night, and even into the next day, there was still no sign. The family held on to hope that the child was just hidden, so they went to consult a sorcerer. The sorcerer declared that the child had been taken by the demon near Chandra's house, the one from the riverbank trees. He said the child's body was hidden where the demon resided. The sorcerer also warned that this demon had been struck by lightning once and missed, making it incredibly powerful. Only another lightning strike could defeat it. No one else could cure it. The family was heartbroken, weeping in despair. But they believed a life must be seen, and a death must have a body. So, the unfortunate child's family prepared offerings and prayed fervently to the demon. They begged for the child's body to be returned so they could bury him. And indeed, after the offerings, people found the child's body stuck in the tree roots near the riverbank. When the mother saw her child's body, she fainted from grief. The entire village felt deeply for the family. They had struggled to have children, only to lose this one. They were both terrified of the demon and hated it, but felt powerless. Chandra then continued, saying that one bright moonlit night, no one in the village could sleep. The demons crying and laughing echoed throughout the entire town. Chandra's father, being brave, opened the door to look. Chandra, being young, wasn't so bold. Only his father was truly fearless. His father would never forget the sights he witnessed that night. He even said that if he didn't recount it, people might not believe in the existence of spirits. His father said he saw a man standing silently in a boat in the middle of the river. The man was facing the line of riverbank trees where the old man demon resided. Terrified but curious, Chandra's father gritted his teeth and crept down to the riverbank. He stood hidden behind a coconut tree in the front yard. From there, he could still see the demon leaping from branch to branch, cackling high-pitched laughs. But now, for some reason, its stomach was ripped open, its guts spilling out and dangling. They swung and swayed with the demon's movements. The man in the boat remained perfectly still in the middle of the river. After a moment, the demon stopped laughing. Chandra's father noticed that the chaotic sounds of the night abruptly fell silent. It was so quiet, he couldn't hear even an insect or even his own breathing. His father later told the family that at that moment, a small, compact cloud began to swirl and move directly over the coconut trees by the river. He felt less afraid now and thought about running back inside. But then he worried that if he ran too fast, the demon would hear him and notice his movements. So he forced himself to stay still and kept watching. He said that from the cloud, a bolt of lightning shot down with a thunderous crash. All he saw was a blinding flash of light, and then nothing else. Chandra's father, standing nearby, bled from his ears. He collapsed, struggling to breathe. By the time he managed to crawl back into the house, he looked out and saw that the man was still standing in the boat. The boat slowly drifted out towards the sea, then disappeared from view. The entire village woke up from the loud noise, but no one dared to open their doors to look. When morning came, people saw that the coconut trees along the riverbank near grandfather's house had been completely uprooted over a large area. Surrounding them were foul-smelling black puddles clinging to the ground. From that day on, the demon no longer appeared to bother the village. The village returned to peace. But from beginning to end, no one ever knew where the demon came from, or if it had been residing there for a very long time, or why it only began causing trouble at that specific time. The lasting consequence for Chandra's father was his temporary deafness. It took about a month before his hearing returned to normal. Years later, when Chandra was grown and had his own children, his father revealed something more. He said that often in the middle of the night, he would still hear rustling footsteps moving around the house. They sounded like someone groaning in pain or from hunger and cold. Sometimes there would be tiny cat meows followed by faint giggling. It was as if the demon knew he could hear it and was doing it on purpose. His father kept it a secret because he was afraid the rest of the family, especially the children, would be haunted. He only revealed it after the demon was struck by lightning and died, and after the trauma had subsided and his children had grown up. He would tell them during family conversations. This kind of storytelling, Uncle Three concludes, is very characteristic of folk ghost stories from the countryside, the kind of supernatural tales we often hear in everyday village life. Thank you for listening to tonight's story, episode 22. See you again for episode 23 on Uncle Three's Ghost Story channel.